Hi, everybody. How you doing? All right. I mean, I guess it's a time for moderate enthusiasm. I understand. My name's Aiden Flax-Clark. I'm the director of Live from NYPL. So I'm thrilled to see all of you here. Thrilled for all of you who are joining us online. Thank you, wherever you are. Thank you very much for being with us. I get to introduce the great Sarah Lewis, who has joined us to talk about her latest book, The Unseen Truth: How When Race Changed Sight in America. Sarah will be speaking with the inimitable Nell, Irvin painter, and we are just so thrilled to welcome them both back to the library. They were actually last year together to talk about Nell's book, so this is a nice turnaround. Sarah's book is a historical inquiry into how language and images can be and were abused to fuel racial stereotypes and misinformation. It's an incredible piece of writing, and it was researched right here in the library during Sarah's time as a fellow in the Dorothy and Lewis B. Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers. I think we have some other Coleman Fellows in the audience tonight. Now, if you're like me, you may sometimes lately be asking yourselves, why bother to read about the past right now when the news is moving so fast that it is impossible to keep up with what's actually happening in the present? But Sarah's book, which is a historical spotlight on how propaganda and willed blindness can join forces to distort our reality, is a perfect example of history's vitality and of how the present is shaped by the past and the stories that we tell about it. And I think a lot of people right now, for all the wrong reasons, know of that power, the people who are waging a war on history, whether it's pardoning January 6 rioters, eviscerating the staff at the National Archives, pulling books from the shelves of libraries and schools. They know how true that is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to steal history right out from under us. But we understand that power at the library, too, hopefully for better reasons. And here in the middle of Black History Month in the year 2025, it is still Black History Month here at the library, by the way. We have not canceled it. During Black History Month, a book like Sarah's that helps us understand the delusions, the distractions, the disinformations that have plagued conversations about race in this country back to the beginning, it really couldn't feel like a more pressing read, which is my plug for you going to purchase it right over there, please, after the talk, if you haven't already. It's a wonderful book, and I believe, Sarah, will you be signing it afterward? Fantastic. So you can purchase it here, and then you can get it signed over there. Also for sale at the table is Nell's landmark work of history on race in America, The History of White People, which is a brilliant, incisive, original, and surprisingly funny book. Who's read it? All right. Well, that's a lot of hands I didn't see, so you got to go purchase that as well. For me, this is a book in a small pile of must-reads. So please, the two of them are such wonderful companions. But of course, if you don't want to purchase it, obviously everyone here has a library card, right? You wouldn't come in this room without a library card? Because that would be deeply shameful. You can get both of books with your library card as well. One quick plug before we get to things. Speaking of Black History Month, I'm sure many of you are familiar with our sister research library, the Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture in Harlem. Yeah, that's right. Now, do you know it's the 100th anniversary of the Schomburg's founding? All right, well, what am I doing here? Yeah, give it up for the Schomburg Center. They were founded in 1925 as the Division of Negro Literature, and today the Schomburg has grown to steward 11 million items, and it stands as one of the world's leading cultural institutions promoting the preservation, study, and celebration of Black cultures all over the world. The Centennial is going to be filled with events, exhibitions, and all kinds of really other wonderful things. It's all going to kick off officially in May, so I really can't encourage you to join in on celebrating one of the city's greatest gems. Please go to schomburg.org/100 to find out what's happening and to stay up to date, and that's /100. Okay, for tonight, at the end of the conversation, Sarah will be glad to take some of your questions. There are note cards on your chairs. You can write down your questions. Please phrase them in the form of questions. And then some of my colleagues will come by and collect them from you during the talk. If you're watching online, you can put your questions in the chat or email us at publicprograms@nypl.org. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isbahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, but more by all of you. So thank you very much for being here. Please join me in welcoming Nell Painter and Sarah Lewis.
Hey, Sarah Lewis.
Oh, the extraordinary Nell Painter. Hello. Hello, everyone.
Before we start talking about this incredible book, this book, Walks on Water, I want to share with you two really nice pieces of news. So wait until the second one to clap. The Unseen Truth was selected for honorable mention distinction for the James A. Porter Book Award, and you all know who James A. Porter was. Even though the scope of the book doesn't fit quite so neatly into the scope of the award, it feels especially significant. One reviewer stated, "This book will be required reading in art history, American studies, and a range of interdisciplinary courses for decades to come. This text offers scholars across the humanities an entryway into the visual history of race in Western art." Sarah was also just invited to speak at the UN General Assembly to give a keynote address about the Vision and Justice Research Initiative as part of their upcoming plenary meeting in March to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Now, Sarah and I have been talking for 20 years. And we started talking about the Caucasus, and we kept talking on a trip to the Caucasus, to Georgia, in 2019. Did that trip influence your thinking in this book?
It did. And I first really, I want to offer some thanks and discuss the trip. I feel so moved and honored to be here with the extraordinary Nell Painter. I want to say I hope that everyone in their life has someone like you in it, but I know it's not possible. Because she, for me, has been a dear friend, a model of how to be a scholar, a model for how to be a woman in the world. And I'm just so moved by the ability to constantly count on your advice and your wisdom. So thank you. To have this all in one is so rare. So if you have another Nell in your life, you've got to tell me who she is or he is. And I'm thrilled to be here at the New York Public Library with you, Nell, because so much of the work that's come out of my heart and mind has been birthed and nourished and inspired by what's happened here. I think whether it's through the Cullman Fellowship, thank you to all those who support that program and who run that program, or the collections, the map division library we'll speak about in a bit. Today, especially, I think it's important to salute the extraordinary work that happens in libraries and these institutions. And so I don't want to miss a moment to mark that miracle. So thank you to Aidan Flax-Clark and all of your colleagues for putting this event together and making this possible. Thank you to those who are on the live stream, my parents too, who made me possible, and many dear friends who are here in the room tonight. So there are very few people who would have done what you did and said yes to a trip to try to discover the so-called homeland of whiteness. And that's really what I asked Nell in 2019. She had been at work, you'd been at work on the history of white people, and I was up to the work of this book, but realized that this term Caucasian that we use as a cognate for whiteness, references a geography, the Caucasus region, but I didn't feel like I could write about it and not see it for myself. So thanks to some research funding at Harvard, I'm not sure they exactly knew what I was about to use it for. We funded a trip to go to the region in 2019. And we thought we'd show you a few pictures from the trip. This is us getting off the plane, thinking of what we've gotten ourselves into, going to the homeland of whiteness here. But we, in fact, found ourselves meeting with members of the diaspora, wanting to do research to ascertain whether or not they had the same sense of what the term Caucasian meant there as we do here. And we found they were a little surprised when we presented at this Caucasian conference, a conference for people who are actually from the Caucasus region, not a conference of people who are nominally white. And they were pretty stunned to the point where we kind of were surrounded as if we were sort of scholars, celebrities, having brought this new information. Anthropologists, basically. And we learned some dances from people from the region. We were part of different commemoration events. And that book changed my way of thinking about the impact of this seemingly throwaway term that we just discard as a relic of racial science. So that began thinking about the stakes of what has come out in the unseen truth. That was the beginning. The journey there happened after you had finished this book. And so I wondered for you at times whether or not your book might have changed if you had gone prior, but we could talk about that another time too. Yeah, so it did.
The answer is yes.
Yeah. You know, this picture is actually, this is a picture that is us surrounding a monument that's close to the site of the so-called genocide of the people from the Caucasus region. And part of the reason that we don't have a robust diaspora of people from the Caucasus region anywhere is because of this event that happened in the 19th century, known as the Caucasian War. And the survivors constitute this diaspora. There's this monument there that they were dedicating that day, and you can see us tucked into the assembly of those gathered. But it was a moment where this concept, this abstract concept, right, of the Caucasian became living when we were with members of the diaspora who wanted to see their own heritage cleaved and separated from how it's been used by racial scientists, wanted to be able to use the term Caucasian as an identity and a geography, but found that they could not. So that picture alone started, for me, a way of thinking about the stakes of the project beyond the history of racial science and into a discussion of racial regimes and vision and how we judge the world. Yeah.
So this is very much a place.
Yes. Let me go back.
Do you want to talk about maps? This is my favorite chapter in this book.
Yeah. So this book was held up for a while because I knew there was something I was missing. I think a lot of probably writers and researchers and artists in the room have that sense. What was missing for me were maps. Now it's kind of sound kind of strange to say that, but maps. So let me do one thing in terms of stage management here. Well, actually, oh no, that's yours. I'll use this.
Go ahead.
I think slide 14, if you could call that up. It might be 13, 14. Let's see. It's going to look like a grainy map. Yeah, 14, that's correct. Okay. 14 is good. I don't want to create any, okay. So right before we went on our trip to the Caucasus region, I came by this library, and it was because we were being given itineraries with names of places that I could not find on Google Maps. And so I, just as a researcher, thought it would be interesting to see if I can find them in these antiquated maps and atlases. So I go to the map division, and I start to work with this extraordinary librarian, Ian Fowler, who's here tonight, and I want to thank him, because without his work and belief in my project, I don't think I could have completed this book. And I asked him for maps of the Caucasus region, and there's no search term that's going to yield that, really. So he has to effectively bring out all of the maps and atlases that he has in the collection. And eventually he starts to see what I'm looking for, as he says. But one of the first maps I saw was this one. It's this ethnological chart of the world. It's from 1876. And it's the kind of atlas that would have been popular in homes. But what I started to see struck me as unusual enough to write about. And so I actually think I might read.
Please.
Yeah, I'll read from the book. So this is on page 145, chapter 4. I remember the day when map division librarian Ian Fowler from here looked at the material I located and said, "I see what you're researching now." He graciously brought out what seemed to be most of the library's U.S. atlases, geography textbooks, and teacher's manuals for the decades in question, including items I could not have found in the library catalog. As I worked through the maps and geography textbooks that were taught in segregated schools in the United States, I thought of what Catherine McKittrick has called the corporeal and effective labor of Black liberation practices. My initial request hadn't changed, I just had realized that there was no way to narrow the request down further. The process of research had shifted my own conceptual filing system, along with my understanding of the breadth and focus required to examine this history. And I go on, I'm going to jump around in the chapter a little bit. Maps of the Black Sea area during this period showed that racial regimes were crucially supported by extractive logic in the symbolic terrain. The patterns of map-making history disclose this interlocking relationship between the history of visualization and racial regimes. I had not planned to study maps. I was preparing for a trip to the Caucasus region for additional research and following a trail left by Woodrow Wilson when he requested an image of the women from the region.
I'm going to bring you back to Woodrow Wilson.
We're going to go right there, yes. The trip meant going to places that were not showing up on maps I could find easily online. Drives towards Anaklia and Abkhazia, the heart of Circassia in the Caucasus region. To trace the shifts in the assembly of maps of the region, methodically, I started looking for US atlases from the 1970s. I opened this atlas you're seeing and saw this map you are. It was made by someone very well known, a Scottish engraver, John Bartholomew, and it was one of the first pages in the atlas, just after the Mercator projection of the world spread out over 2 pages. In a cartouche on the lower left of this map of the human races were fine-lined engravings of the busts of ethnic types grouped under the headings Caucasian, Mongolian, Malay, Negro, and American, the 5-fold representation of the varieties of mankind. The Circassian's image is the apex, centered within the top row as a bust with flowing hair underneath a capped headdress and a high neck top of imperial style. A legend on the top identifies the color-coded regions. In small cursive letters you see Caucasian, Georgian, and Caucasian race. Jump to one more place. Stage management here. Yes. But by 1891, those details, those ethnic types I mentioned, the Circassian figures, had been removed entirely from these atlases. Instead, the front matter of this atlas presented a 5-fold figure template as the opening of the section on man and a discussion of the industries of the world. This was a diagram, just as you saw in the prior, but now the pared-down races of man were juxtaposed with the schematic rendering of spheres representing planets. Quote, "The civilized nations are nearly all Caucasian," the text states before launching into a discussion of the 4 classes of civilization, quote, "engaged in agriculture, manufacture, and commerce, which have established systems of education and have reached the highest perfection." The rhyme between racial types and celestial bodies, the most vast spatial framework imaginable, suggested that the order and hierarchy they represent was totalizing as a gravitational arrangement of the solar system. Figurative cartouches emerged as a frame through which to understand racial ideology. The Caucasus, first centralized as a geography in popular atlases with details, as you've seen in the prior slide, now became a floating, figurative concept. And I'll end there.
Thank you.
So when I came to the library and found these maps, I realized that what was being left out were the details that no longer supported the foundations of white racial supremacy and racial ideology. And that work could not have happened without a librarian who was empathic to the project, understood what I needed, and was willing to bring things out that the accession records didn't show.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, well, where shall we go next? Well, I have a question for you, actually related to maps. The maps you're seeing here are actually created by an extraordinary artist named Nell Painter. She created Black Sea composite map with various numbers, focusing on this region. Now, what prompted you to do so?
These maps, they're all, I made them at Yaddo.
Yeah.
Made them all together. They're all in the same schema, but they're called the Black Sea composite because the body of water in the middle is my Black Sea. I just called it Black Sea. I don't know if you can see the writing very clearly, but at the top is Ukraine. And then it goes around to Thailand, and then it comes down around to the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then it comes around to the Mississippi River and the delta of the Mississippi River, and Houston, and Alabama, and Turkey, and Bulgaria, and then on the side with the bump on the left, that's West Africa turned around, and the Congo River comes through. So all of these lands around this Black Sea are slave lands where young women are bought and sold for sex. That's the Odalisque, who's a central figure in the history of white people. So this is a map of where women can be bought and sold. And what's struck with me about our Georgia and Georgia in the USA, or Haiti in the Dominican Republic, or Ukraine and Russia, all these places where people were bought and sold, where women were bought and sold, they have a lot in common. And so the Black Sea pulls them together. In the middle of this Black Sea, there's Puerto Rico and Jamaica and Crimea. Now that you're used to the Ukrainian war, you know where Crimea is. But my point was that there is something tragic that holds these places together.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons to write The Unseen Truth was to shine light on this hidden history that the paintings examine, and that is the history of the Caucasian War. This is a war that happens, right, at the same time, that ends at the same time as the American Civil War. But through the reporting on this region, Americans come to see the history of sexual slavery that you're referencing here, so-called white slavery, but they also start to see that there's no such thing as whiteness in this region at all. But they do this through the force of a visual culture, right? There's so many different performances and representations, whether they're paintings or prints, that begin to give people a sense that there is something wrong with the foundations that they've been told, the narratives they've been given to understand racial hierarchy, so-called. So when I saw these paintings in Nell's studio, it would have been a long time ago now, I thought, oh, this hasn't been explored. How do you, I mean, so much of what this book really deals with is this fundamental question: when are we going to give up the lie?
I don't know. And people are working really hard on it right now.
Mm-hmm.
But you touched on a name that I want you to come back to. This is a book that includes a lot on the people you would look for here. W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass. If we have time, I'll come back to your engagement with Frederick Douglass. But first, I want you to talk a little bit more about Woodrow Wilson, who comes through this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So Woodrow Wilson animates this book as a leader who created a template that really undergirds our understanding of race today. He created this through federal policy, and he created it through a really little-known aspect of his own history as a historian, too. There was a footnote in a book by Charles King that stunned me, and it was about Woodrow Wilson, and in part launched our trip in this book. Woodrow Wilson, at the end of World War I, when he really should have been doing, I would imagine, anything else, asks for a report about the so-called, well, he didn't say so-called, about the legendary beauty of the women from the Caucasus region. 1919. I wondered whether this actually happened. He writes the letter to the chief of staff of the army stationed in the region. This is a serious request. I mean, what's he up to here? So Woodrow Wilson's request prompted this whole research question I had, which yielded an answer. Yes, the request was taken seriously. There was a party of 70 women that were paraded in front of its ambassador, High Commissioner in Tiflis, now Tbilisi, Georgia, of women from the Caucasus, to show Wilson that they had in fact been able to produce it. They were able to give him a sense of the physiognomy, the look of the women. Why? This is a time when there's a hardening of segregation and seemingly, inviolate ways of understanding race today. Why would there be interest in women from the Caucasus region? Is it possible, I thought, that Wilson, who was a professor at Princeton, before becoming president and wrote extensively, understood that there was a problem, a fractured ground under the whole history of racial formation? And the answer was yes, very likely he did. So the seriousness with which a president would take this history is what forced me to understand the stakes and the gravitas of seemingly, for some, more inconsequential ways of understanding society, like performances or paintings. No, that was actually also empirical data for him. So when we went to the Caucasus region, it was also to follow in his footsteps. We went to Tbilisi. We went to the archive there. I was sort of hoping we might find some trace of him. But that transformed a project that could have been seen as really more only in the realm of art history into something that had stakes, right, for how we see more broadly. So there's Wilson. Another way that he populates the book is by thinking about how fixated he was on the arts. He was able to create a racial regime, segregation, without uttering a word about it, right? He was able to do so through visual cues, ultimately, in the federal government. There's only one existing photograph of segregation in the federal government under Wilson's administration. Why? Because that was his directive. Instead, it was executed through this nearly invisible map of diaries and diagrams in these diaries about where people would sit. Now, that wasn't an accident, So he's a visual theorist in many ways, and it created this insidious regime of what I call racial detailing, which is a precursor to racial profiling. But the way in to understand it is to think through why he would have wanted these reports from the so-called homeland of whiteness.
Well, one of the reasons is, as I discovered working on the history of white people, is that the science of race was all bound up with ideas of beauty.
Yes.
So it wasn't enough for white people to be the smartest and the richest and have the best cars and the best houses. They had to be the most beautiful also in scientific terms. So over and over again, the people who are scientifically minded want to show beauty. Now, several times you show us images of beauty because the Caucasians or Circassians were famed in the 19th and early 20th centuries for being the most beautiful people in the world.
Yes.
So P.T. Barnum, I should let you explain this because it's yours, but what I want to say is that you have lots of photographs of people with hair like this.
I do. So one of the images that began this journey, I'm going to flip through, well, this is a good set. Years ago, when I was a graduate student at Yale, I stumbled across these images in the Beinecke's Rare Books Manuscript Library up there, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It turns out these are widely popular performers, Circassian beauties, that were set on stage by the famed impresario P.T. Barnum. And he did so at a time when he was bankrupt and he needed another act to revive his career. And he found that these women, so-called exemplars of white racial purity, were the thing to do it. But the problem was, at least for me as a researcher, I couldn't understand that people looked at them and saw anything like whiteness at all, which is why I began to study them and to research them. Now, there had been writing on them from mainly in the field of performance studies, but it hadn't connected up to the broader stakes and implications. This slide shows really what those stakes were. So on the left is the first performer, and what struck me is just how strange her stance was and her sash, and I thought, it looks like she's referencing something here. And what I found was that she was referencing a well-known Circassian resistance leader, this famed imam who was the region's hero for resisting all these incursions. Russia was trying to gain control of the Caucasus region from the Ottoman Empire, and that's what resulted in the Caucasian War and the genocide. Imam held them off for decades, and his fame was so well known that Woodrow Wilson wrote about it, right? And he was understood to be a kind of cognate for Jefferson Davis, too. So you would see these parallels made, in part because of the resonance between the history of slavery and both sides of the Atlantic and the Black Sea, and so on. But the image of Shamil was also on stages, I learned, and she rhymed with him. But I mean, Barnum was such a performative genius. He was able to find this contour of a woman who could both reference this historically accurate, figure, Shamil, but also connect up to the very, template of what kind of can represent Black womanhood, this afro, and skewer the American public, right, into asking whether there really is any such thing as whiteness at all. And we know the answer is no, but the public didn't want to understand that. And so these performers were popular for decades. Up until the 1920s, you can see references to them. And so I wanted to understand why they were so popular, what it meant that we once saw these fictions underneath the whole racial regime and found a way to disregard it and move on. Yeah, so that began.
These were absolutely fascinating. I'm going to move on. Here's a question that I wrote for you.
Okay.
You write so eloquently about the refusal to see. And as you know, I agree with you about the active role of refusals to see in both scholarship and everyday lives. I think you're also claiming that images are more potent than words in ideologies of race. Is that a correct understanding of your point?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I love speaking with so much is because as a historian, the rigor, the beauty of your mind is what I get alongside your understanding of the power of images as an artist yourself. So, yes, I do think that both images but also vision are the two most critical civic skills we have in the United States. Why? The story of the United States is nearly unspeakable. Not in the sense necessarily of it being odious, not like that. It's literally the contradictions in the country's founding really prevent words alone from capturing who we are. As soon as you begin to try to do it, you realize you've got to revise your sentence. You know, it's founded to reflect liberty and equality, but with the foundation of slavery. How do you do this? So to resolve it, to resolve the contradictions and the limitations on belonging, who counts, you've always needed an image. You've always needed to push people past their limited sense of the possible into what could be. And the image has done this, objects have done this, monuments, and so on. It's done this in the context of asking this question, when are we going to give up the lie? This is what P.T. Barnum was effectively doing. Today, I mean, we make as many images. Nicholas Mirzoaf's research, I think, shows us this. They say as many images today in a few minutes, 2 to 3 as were made in the entire 19th century. We are surrounded by images, extraordinary works, and there's some fantastic artists in the room today here. I know we have photographer Lyle Ashton Harris, whose work I just adore. He's been a dear friend for so long, and Akar Shep and others. And we owe so much to our image makers. Why? Because with the onslaught of these images, we need to be trained to still our gaze long enough to see what matters, you know, and what counts. That's often what we look to the artist to do. So if you think back over the last decade, you can probably pull out an image that represents for you what this political age has been about. And we look, and the book I'm writing now for Random House, Vision and Justice, attempts to effectively do that through a series of objects. Which works can perform that is the question. So I do believe in the power of image in that way. Yeah, for those reasons. Becoming an artist yourself, was it inspired by that kind of thinking too? I'm curious.
No.
No. What inspired?
Sojourner Truth did it. Sojourner Truth wouldn't let me use my skills with text. She sent me to Marquand's artistry library. I really liked being there, and I stayed longer than just to overcome the failure of text.
Will you tell everyone the title of your next book?
Sojourner Truth was a New Yorker. And she didn't say that.
The laughter tells me a lot. Know what you mean by the second half, but some don't. Can you tell them a little bit about what you mean by the second half of the title?
No, that's too long a story.
Okay.
But I will tell you that she didn't say that. And if you go around saying that, I'm coming after you.
All right.
I'm looking at our time. I know you all have some questions. I would like you to go back to Vision and Justice and Frederick Douglass, because I think Frederick Douglass was kind of at the root of this project in so many ways.
Yes, absolutely. So Vision and Justice was also birthed here at the New York Public Library. I was not yet, I don't think, brave enough fully to write the unseen truth as it needed to be written, but I had just found myself reading Frederick Douglass's speech, Pictures in Progress, in his own hand, and realized that we had not taken seriously his understanding of the power of representation for what I would call representational justice in America. So the Vision and Justice framework with Frederick Douglass became the launch for this initiative and publication in 2016. That project is really asking one question that he says at the end of his speech. We'd still be thinking about 150 years later. What is the power of images for American progress? Why is it so necessary? He thought, really humbly in his speech, that it would take others coming along, right, to better explain what he meant. And there's so many in the room tonight who are part of that work. The unseen truth extends what's most, I think, perplexing for scholars to examine in that speech. Because, Douglass, at the time, he's writing as the most photographed American man in the 19th century, right? Not African-American man, American man. What did he know about the need for a representative figure, stunning as he was, too, to push back against denigrating racial stereotypes? He understood this enough to put himself in front of the camera that many times. But he also, in that speech, he doesn't salute any one name of any particular artist. He doesn't talk about Matthew Brady or J.P. Ball. Instead, he's talking about the phenomenology of images, what they do to us. He's describing this internal picture gallery he calls the mind. And it's this ode to vision, in effect. And it confuses his audience. He delivers it, 1861. His audience stays because he's this prodigious orator, but he is thinking through what really I hope the unseen truth is about. How vision is really a process not of seeing the world, but reading it. Assessing the world, not observing it, and to understand that transformation of vision from observation into this regime that we are caught by and live with every day is what he hoped to deal with. And so that speech is endlessly, I think, important, and I hope that the book that my colleague John Stauffer put out with all the speeches, collected, is one that you have and keep. It has all the photographs of Frederick Douglass, too. So it birthed Douglass both vision and justice and really the unseen truth. Douglass is the headwaters of so much. I could spend every semester teaching at Harvard just dealing with Douglass. So I think we also have some questions right from the audience here.
There's some really good and some very hard questions here.
Hard.
I'm not going to ask the easy one. Sarah, where will your work take us next? Because you just told us.
Yes.
Oh, these are so good. How much does the power of image and vision rely on shared culture? In the contemporary context of hyperfragmentation, how do we artists, historians, citizens resist minimization and silencing?
There are two good questions there. I would invert the first question, though, and say that images create our shared culture, ultimately. We're able to process them because, and we recognize that we do have shared culture when you examine them. There's a photograph that comes to mind, and I think most of the people in the room are going to know this, so I'll ask. Have you seen a photograph of a young boy in the Oval Office, when it was President Obama's office, who's touching Obama's head? How many people have seen? Yeah, nearly everyone, or half at least. Why? Well, in that image, he's 5 years old, this young boy, Jacob Philadelphia, and he's been given one question to ask the president, and he wants to know if his hair texture is really the same as his. And the answer is not just given to him. He says, touch it. And President Obama leans down. Now, his parents are with him. Jacob Philadelphia is his brother. Why does that young boy need to touch the evidence that he can be the president, right? You know what's happening in that picture. You understand that he's been given, despite the best efforts of his parents, cues, signals, messages in visual culture that suggest to him the precarity of his dreams, really. So in that picture, we get a sense of the stakes of not realizing how we create shared culture, how we allow for possibility through images that surround us and through what we prevent being surrounding us. So I'll answer that because there were two complex questions, but yeah.
Now, this is a question I don't want you to answer because it's too divisive.
She's my protector, too. She is.
But I want to read the question because it's a really good question, but it's too hard. How does your book fit into current political issues such as the Israeli-Palestinian war? We would all be fighting with one another if we tried to answer that, but it's a really good question.
Yeah. And then there are lots of ways in which it fits in. I was grateful to Aiden for
She answers it.
for saluting some, but I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. How did quote-unquote race gain purchase in our terminology? Is the term ancestry more useful than the term race?
I think, Nell, this is a question for you, for at least the first part, because that's more the subject of the history of white people to a certain extent. Yeah. Do you want to answer some of it?
Okay, so the scientific, I don't get into white nationalist in the history of white people and Christian nationalism and so forth. If I were writing today, I would have to. But my book is an intellectual history that answers just that question. But the answer is, who is speaking, to whom, where, when, and for what purpose? That's the answer.
She's the master of concision.
How does color blindness play a role in unseeing truth?
Do we believe in color blindness? Is the first question I would ask back.
Speak up. What's the answer? Do you believe in color blindness?
No.
They don't believe in color
They don't
blindness.
believe in color. Yeah. But unseeing is something we all do. We do see and then deliberately disregard what's in front of us and then see again. And that really is the subject of the book.
What aspects of your treatment inspired you to write more aggressively / passionately, as you mentioned?
We're, I think, in a time where it's critical for those of us who have access to archives to have an imaginative way of putting things together, to be unafraid, I'd say. And the model of the history of white people that you offered allowed me to be unafraid, taking this work further. I think there are moments where you realize that you're fashioned also for a generation, for an era. I think it was no accident. It felt to me that it was no accident that I would be in a position at Harvard, having studied a whole range of disciplines that don't typically come together, and then be presented with this kind of material. I wanted to do what I felt might not be done if I didn't put it all together. That started to occur to me when I would ask questions, really basic questions of, museum collections, sort of archivists and librarians, and find that access to things that I should be able to obtain were being denied. I started to realize that there were some stakes here I was up against. And that gave me a kind of fire. I also had a really a difficult personal experience. I was in a near-death car collision while I was writing this book that forced me to take ownership of my life and its value anew. And of all the things I saw in the collision, I did see these books. I saw this and the others, and they all flashed before my eyes. Not this cover, but other iterations of them. But really, when I was healing, I felt the need to be of service in a really particular way. So when you lose the fear of kind of death, you lose in that kind of an experience. archivist telling you don't have access to Caucasian materials becomes less of a problem, than it might have before. So I rewrote the entire book after that experience with a different kind of fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here is our last audience question, and then I have a last question, and I see we only have a few minutes.
Okay.
So I want you to give the audience short shift and answer my question at more length.
Okay.
Here's from the audience. When you ask, when are we going to give up the quote-unquote lie, can you clearly share what quote-unquote lie you're referring to in 25 words or less?
Yes. Yes. When are we going to give up the lie that there's any basis for this regime that suggests that anyone is any better than any other? That is the foundational lie. Yeah, that's it. That is it. Yeah. So I gave you short shrift, sorry, that she asked.
But
that
that's
really
a
is it.
really good answer.
And that's it. And that's what the book deals with. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's my last question.
Okay.
Who were Swan M. Kendricks and F.H.M. Murray, and why did you choose them to embody the meanings of Woodrow Wilson's segregation and expulsion of black civil servants in Washington, D.C.? Remember those names, Swan M. Kendricks and F.H.M. Murray.
So can we go to the last slide in the deck, please? I'm not sure of the number, in the 20s. So I can have them on the screen. Yeah. So the book ends with Swan Marshall Kendrick opening this chapter, and he is one of the few black clerks working in Woodrow Wilson's administration. I came across material that broke my heart, really, and expanded it. He was working right before Wilson took office with such optimism. The Library of Congress has a series of letters that he wrote to his then fiancée, or the woman he was courting early on, Ruby Bois, whose image you're seeing, and that are just, if anyone could receive a letter like that, it's a woman, your life would be made. These letters, just gorgeous. And he was filled with so much hope and optimism about their life together. And as soon as Wilson takes office, within weeks to a few months, any hope he had for advancement in the administration was completely gone. He didn't speak Spanish, but started writing to her, for example, about wanting to maybe move to South America for better employment options. He had such a clear sense of the limits. Now, as a figure, as a mind, as a writer, this is a W.B. Du Bois. I mean, period, end of story. This is a man who was receiving all these other offers to work, different Fisk, et cetera, but was effectively being wasted, right, through this inability to climb because of federal segregation. Now, there was no explicit decree about segregation. He had to perceive it through these series of visual cues he was receiving. And what does he do? And this is what populates that chapter. He and, well, you're on the right, this is Swan Marshall Kendrick, another black clerk, Freeman Henry Morris Murray, take it upon themselves. I thought I did, but I don't, so you'll have to get the book to see the other image of Murray with Du Bois, in fact, because they were working together. But they begin to study the visual landscape, the built environment, the monuments that were beginning to go up in 1915 to salute Confederate leaders, to understand the role that visual culture was playing in instantiating racial domination. They're doing this in their non-existent free time, working full-time as federal clerks. They are, Swan Marshall Kendrick is writing to various magazines and newspapers about how they are characterizing Black Americans, all these racial epithets. There's one letter that gutted me. He wrote to the publishers of Mother Goose nursery rhymes that he was reading to his daughter and asking why the N-word was throughout, And the publisher writes back and says, "Oh, no one's ever pointed this out to us before, as a problem. We'll consider, maybe changing." A letter nearly every day. He's doing this through the work of the NAACP's Correspondence Club. The pointillist, painstaking work, right, of itemizing all of these indicators of racial domination in the landscape, from the printed landscape to the visual landscape. This is the work that these two leaders embody, exemplify. It is the unsung heroic work of the early civil rights movement. So Murray and Kendrick need to be in your data bank of understanding who laid the ground for us all to be here together. So Wilson is in there, yes, but the payoff of this book really is to be able to salute the Kendricks and to salute the Murrays that make what we do possible.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Wait. Before you really thank Sarah, I want you to dwell for a moment on what she said just now, because people like Murray in particular, and George Washington Williams, and just a whole host of Black intellectuals have been doing this work for over a century. They have been doing this work, and you're doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you hopefully over here. Thank you so much.